The season is nigh. Time to go on the record predicting some Michigan football superlatives, major award winners, surprise players, freshmen of influence, and more coming your way next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Yes, caught.
They said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, and a touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue. I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. It's the final one before we start playing Michigan games for real as the reigning national champions. And that means it's time to go on the record one last time. Soon, no more conjecture, no more projection, just analysis and witness and observation. We look forward to that. But one more week of talking season. So here it goes. Let's go on the record with some Michigan superlatives. Let's make some predictions for the upcoming season. Now, just to reiterate, if you missed my college football preview a little more than a month ago, I have our final record being 10-2, but 8-1 in the Big Ten. I think Michigan loses a couple of games early on to Texas at home and then at Washington, which is the first road game of the year. And it's going to be the first road game in a hostile environment that really many of these offensive players are going to ever have faced. So I think that offense gets off to a sluggish start with all the new faces there. And then I do think catches fire late in the year. Similar to what happened after the national title in 97, where Michigan started 0-2 and then ended up sharing the Big Ten championship. I think the Wolverines will lose to Ohio State in a Big Ten title game rematch, but make the college football playoff for a fourth straight year. Now, as we discuss some major award winners, I know this is aggressive, man, but tell me which of these you think is nuts. Let's start with the Outland Trophy. Now, most of you are going to think Mason Graham should be there, and you'll get no argument out of me, but I kind of think Mason Graham's going to be the focus of a lot of blocking schemes this year. And I think Kenneth Grant is going to get leveled up one-on-one quite a bit to compensate for that. And I just think Kenneth Grant, as great as Mason Graham is, as much as I love him, I think Kenneth Grant is a Jordan Davis level of athlete. And the ceiling's a little bit higher. And I think freed up with a lot of one-on-one blocking, I think Kenneth Grant is going to be an absolute game wrecker all season long. So I'm going with Kenneth Grant to win the Outland Trophy in a mild upset over Mason Graham. I'm big on Donovan Edwards too. I think Dono is going to have a monster season. I'm waiting for Heisman odds on him. He's not listed yet. I'm betting it as soon as those come down because I think he's going to have a monster year. I think he'll be used in an Alvin Kamara kind of way and so many high profile events. And I think he's just in a better place spiritually, emotionally, and he's just so dang physically gifted. I think Will Johnson winning the Jim Thorpe won't be a shock or surprise to many people. And then the John Mackey winner, I also think Colston Loveland winning that award won't be a big shock or surprise either. I think Colston Loveland, in fact, I think even one of the coaches said this week, he may end up being Michigan's leading receiver, even as a tight end, given the many different ways that he will be used. I think you'll see him split out as a receiver quite often as well. And I could even add Jayshawn Barham to this list too, the linebacker transfer from Maryland. I mean, playing behind Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, dude's going to be freed up to make a ton of plays. But 4 is already pretty aggressive, so we'll leave it there. All right, next up, offensive newcomer of the year. I think it's going to be Josh Preeb, the transfer at Northwestern, who was, I think, 3rd team All Big Ten last year. Wouldn't shock me if he is 1st team All Big Ten this year for the Wolverines. The defensive newcomer of the year, the aforementioned Jayshawn Barham, I think he's going to be an absolute superstar. Again, I mean, his athleticism behind this defensive line, keeping blockers off of him and occupying that line of scrimmage. I mean, I think you could see some Devin Bush stuff out of him this year. We're in the same number, by the way. Most improved player, I think it's going to be Tyler Morris. Last time we saw him, and we didn't see much of him at all last year. And the last time we saw him was that huge play against USC in the Rose Bowl against Alabama in the Rose Bowl when he outran the entire Crimson Tide secondary, who I think is now all in the NFL, in order to get to the end zone. I think he's going to be Michigan's clear number 1 receiver this year. But I think on the defensive side, it's going to be TJ Guy. I mean, who's going to be that 3rd pass rusher? So you can rotate in there with Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart, who are both outstanding. But I think TJ Guy is going to be TJ Dude. Everybody's talked him up all offseason long. Another one of these, rare recruiting finds out of the, Northeast from the late to great Don Brown. He's still alive, but I mean, late great as a Michigan DC. So I'm going to go with TJ Guy as the most improved player on defense this year. Start talking about freshmen who could make an immediate impact on offense. This one was hard because I don't see, the one place where we could use an immediate impact guy is receiver. And you've got to be in a really elite prospect on the offensive line to play as a true freshman. So, and we've really recruited well and developed well there. We've got plenty of numbers there to come up with some starting 5 that'll be really good by some point this year. So we don't have that receiver recruit. We haven't landed them in this last cycle. So I'm going to go with the number 1 rated offensive recruit Michigan has signed in the last couple of cycles, the former Ohio Mr. Football, the first Ohio Mr. Football Michigan has signed since Charles Woodson. So that's a precedent there. I'm going to go Jordan Marshall. And that's acknowledging he's likely at best going to be the 3rd tailback this year. Now on defense, which is the more settled side of the ball for sure, I do think there's more opportunities for newcomers to play because of the waves of players that they're going to want to play. And I'm going to go with Cole Sullivan, the linebacker prospect who was phenomenal in the spring as an early enrollee. All the veteran players have been talking him up throughout all of camp as well. So he's going to be my pick for the true freshman who makes the most immediate impact on the defensive side of the ball. And then finally, who are some guys that are going to make that sophomore year leap in the program? On offense, I'm going to go with Evan Link on the offensive line. He was the top offensive line prospect in the 23 class. And there's even talk now that he's in the mix at one of the tackle spots there and competing. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they just announced Jair Hill right now is the leader for the cornerback position opposite Will Johnson. He was a big-time recruiting land for Michigan back in 2023. So, I mean, Jair Hill, if he's matured, and there were some maturity questions about him last year, but if he's matured and he's ready for this athletically, Jair Hill and Will Johnson, in terms of just their recruiting profiles, would be as athletic of a corner combo, I mean, that I can recall Michigan having in recent memory. So those are my superlatives for the upcoming season. What are yours? Let us know right here in the comment section. You can question, comment, or insult and share some of your picks so we can laugh at yours, like many of you are probably laughing at mine. All right. And I'm thinking Mark Rogers, being that he is a Bucknut, is probably going to laugh at a few of my picks as well when we come back. And for the final time before it is game week, it is time for the 10-Minute War with our good friend Mark Rogers. Check out his channel here, the voice of college football, right here on YouTube. And you definitely want to check Mark out once the games kick off, because the dude has the Midas touch when it comes to playing games against the number. And Mark, it's good to see you again, my brother. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Steve. Good to see you, and even in that jersey, still good to see you. That's what I expect. So the shock is worn off years ago.
The last time you saw a Michigan player wearing this jersey and the number, he was throwing for 3 touchdowns and running for another in your stadium, as I recall.
Yeah, if you want to really take us there. Steve, you've got everything going on your side anyway. You don't need to force it.
I took it for 20 years. I kind of feel like I do. A little bit. Anyway, let's get to this year and 2024. I laid out some of my projected superlatives for Michigan's upcoming season, and I want to get your take now. You've got the more critical, jaundiced view as the from the Buckeye side of things. So what do you think? What stands out to you as you need drug tested, or I think, that sounds like pretty sober analysis?
Well, you have interrupted my task of figuring out in the next few days whether Will Howard is for real and whether Ohio State can win a national championship, because I'm going to release my predictions later this week, and that's the burning question for me, at least nationally. Are they merely the second best team in the country or the first best team in the country because of Will Howard's performance? We will get to Michigan here. So in looking at your college football playoff projection at 10-3 with a Big Ten championship game loss to Ohio State, avenging for the Buckeyes, at least, the regular season loss. So that gives them with 2 meaningful wins, Ohio State, obviously, and then USC to a certain extent, if we believe USC's, let's say, an 8-4 top 20 team, something in that range.
Or so Oregon, I have them beating Oregon at home as well, remember.
Oh,
yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
They lose to Washington.
Because I think they're losing at Washington, the first road game. I think there'll be a bit of a slow transition on the offense to start the year. Yeah.
That's right. So you are going against chalk, and I admire that, because that's what you have to do in this business if you are truly trying to project reality, because it's so easy and everybody just goes with chalk and the losses are supposed to be here, here, and here, but that's not the way it plays out. So I admire the stab at Washington, difficult trip out to Seattle, but man, a completely different football team. So yeah, they will have the quality wins against Ohio State and Oregon, USC to a lesser extent. So I will raise my percentage of what I considered that to be in regards to 10-3 with a Michigan brand coming off a national championship. And of course, with that kind of resume, what percentage does that lend itself to a college football playoff selection? I would say slightly over 50%.
Oh, I'd say 99.
99%.
Yeah. I mean, you've got wins over Oregon and Ohio State. No one's going to have 2 better wins than that. No one in all of college football will.
Texas and Washington. Washington's going to be maybe a 6-6 football team. So that's not going to help. And Ohio State's going to avenge the loss. Okay. I'm not that far off.
Well, Ohio State would get an automatic bid. So we're really talking, in my scenario, so we're really talking about comparing them to the teams that didn't win their own conference.
Sure.
And so, I think there's a possibility Texas or Alabama, given or Georgia, one of those 2 of those 3 isn't winning the SEC. And particularly if it's Alabama or Texas with their schedules, they could come up with better resumes. But there won't be any other at-large teams. When you game theory the rest of the games out, who else would be in there? There would not be any other at-large teams that could possibly have a better resume than that in terms of quality wins, with the exception of those 2.
Okay, you've won me over. I do believe that the Big Ten gets at least 3 in, and if Michigan is a championship game loser, that technically makes them the 2 seed or maybe the 3.
I mean, Mark, I think it's 50% odds that we would get in at 9-3 if we lose at Washington and we win one of those 3 games. I mean, if you look at the rest of the teams, everybody wants to talk about how good you were compared to a year ago. We're not playing last year; we're playing this year. And so it's and this is where you got to start thinking about, I'm more of a college basketball guy with this stuff than you. You got to start thinking about comparing resumes of teams, and they're not static propositions. You're comparing them in relationships to other teams that you would give bids to, right? And when you're looking at 12 teams compared to 4, there's going to be a lot more of that kind of subjectivism. And I think the amount that's why if you look at what's happened in college basketball, the number one factor since the NCAA first released the RPI in 1993, there have been different selection committees and selection committee chairs. And some years they've factored in how you played your last 10 games more. Some eras factored in how you finished in your conference more, right? But the one constant, regardless of era, has always been overall strength of schedule, particularly who you play in the non-conference, meaning whom you chose to play when you didn't have to play anybody. And that's why when the NCAA created this new formula for college basketball a few years ago, it's heavily weighted towards that. I think you'll see the exact same thing play out here. I think that who you played is going to matter a lot. It's going to matter more than your record, I think, actually.
I'm buying your approach as a evolving process or something that, is new.
But there is
to
a
this.
psychological barrier in college football to putting 9-3 and 8-4 teams in playoffs. I could see, we may not get there overnight. I can see that point too. Yeah.
Well, I'm basing where I'm coming from running the model through the 10 years of the college football playoff with 4 teams and what that playoff ranking would look like for a 10-2 team versus a 9-3 team. The 10-2, as you well know, is almost an automatic, and the 9-3, there are very few that get in. And the 10-3 example that you give in the past would have knocked out almost all those teams. They would have been in at 10-2. But a Wisconsin of 2014 that loses to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game gets knocked out after being safely in. They get knocked down the pegs. Now, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee may actually take their rankings seriously because there's something on the line versus just saying, okay, they're 11 versus 15, big deal. Let's just rank them wherever we want versus the weight of the decision.
Right. And the other thing to think about, too, if you go back over the 14 playoff era, there's really only one 9-3 team that people thought was deserving of a bid, and it was the USC team under Sam Darnold. Okay, that started off very slow. Darnold became the quarterback, and then they dominated the Pac-12 the rest of the year and beat Penn State in one of the best, Rose Bowls of the last decade. But that's a rarity. And keep in mind too, though, they're not in that league anymore. That's one of the reasons why it's going to be hard to take precedence from what happened in the 4-team era, because 9-3 before meant you were probably in another league and you didn't play all these teams. Like, I think LSU's getting in the playoff this year at 9-3. When you look at they play USC in the non-conference, they play Alabama. They play Ole Miss, they play Texas A&M. When you look at their schedule, because of the consolidation of these teams now, 9-3 is good is the new 10-2, and 8-4 is the new 9-3. I think you're going to see that happen. Now, how that will ultimately play itself out as time marches on, do I think in this era we'll see an 8-4 team get in the playoff? I actually do. I don't think it'll be right away, but I do think we'll see something like that. But I definitely think we're going to see at least 3-1-3-loss team in the playoff this year, because a lot of these teams are playing each other now.
You just hit on the word that I was going to bring up, consolidation. The consolidation of the conferences makes for more difficult schedules, which have to be respected. Absolutely. Now, in terms of these player achievements and awards that are going to be doled out to this 10-3 football team, a 3-loss football team is going to win this many achievements individually. I think that this has to be unprecedented if you've got an Outland, a Doak Walker, a Thorpe, and a Mackey award winner.
I agree.
On a team that's lost 3 games.
But tell me which of those is just really nuts, crazy, and I should be drug tested for.
So, Steve, in terms of these award winners, you're not crazy selecting any one of them, but when you put it all together for a team that's going to lose 3 games to be just recognized to this extent with all these award winners, I just don't think it's possible. Well, of course it's possible. It's technically possible, but the probabilities of this happening, I just don't see it happening. But we're going to line them up here. So I think Will Johnson winning the Thorpe is the most likely to happen. There's a lot of reputation there. He's considered the number 1 player, not only in college, but the projected number 1 cornerback going into the NFL draft. So I just think, the cornerbacks, the best cornerbacks in the nation, don't pile up a lot of stats. Obviously, if he turns the ball over and makes plays, picking the ball off, that's only going to aid to his resume. But as long as he's not getting burned, they're not going to pick on him. Opponents won't. Denzel Burke, now at Big Ten Media Days, Ohio State's corner, says that he's the best in the land, but Will Johnson has that reputation, and rightfully so. So I think that's the most likely award to come through for you. Number 2, I've got the Mackey Award with Colston Loveland. And again, there's some reputation involved there. Him coming into this 2024 season with the reputation of being the best now that Brock Bowers has moved on. However, run-heavy offense, Mason Taylor, LSU. Terrence Ferguson's a tremendous athlete at Oregon. He could pile up big numbers with Dylan Gabriel. Those are obviously, with Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, very pass-oriented attacks, as is Ole Miss with Caden Prieskorn. So there will be tight ends that will have better statistical resumes, you got to think, because I just named 3 out of a collection of maybe another 3 or 4 that I could have gone to. So that might be an uphill battle for Colston Loveland, although he may be considered. The football evaluation may win out that the 45 catches out of him and the blocking and everything that he does is more valuable and more meaningful than the 60 catches by somebody else. So we will see there. The Outland Award is an interesting one. So I'm guessing that you're thinking that Mason Graham is going to get all this attention and Kenneth Grant is going to thrive off of that. Would be my guess there.
I agree. I think that Mason Graham will get a ton of attention. He's everybody's cover boy, and he deserves it. I mean, Mason Graham absolutely destroyed Alabama's offensive line in that entire game. You go back and watch the film. Just absolutely dominated Alabama in that game. And so he deserves it all. And I think that's why he's going to get a ton of attention. I also think Kenneth Grant came in a couple of years behind him in terms of development, was the more raw prospect. But in terms of ceiling, Kenneth Grant is more in line with the kind of player Georgia has put into the NFL the last few years. This is the stuff of, Paul Bunyan legends, 6'7" guys that are 320 pounds that are running Nick Singleton down from behind 30 yards downfield. Remember when we played Georgia in the bowl game, the playoff the first time? And who was the big fella? Was it Jordan Davis that caught Blake Corum from behind? Do you remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
We got that guy now. And I think he's going to face a lot of single blocking. And I think you're going to see him take another step forward. And I think he's going to benefit from all the attention Mason Graham's going to get. You're right.
And when it comes to achievements and awards, there are a lot of lazy voters out there, hopefully not with the internet as lazy as they once were. And that play that he pulled off, although it was a, what do you want to call that? A representative play. It wasn't a meaningful play necessarily, other than they might have given up a touchdown on the play to Nick Singleton. But it was just one of those jaw-dropping, like, look at this. This dude is playing defensive tackle, and he's running back down one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. That stays with people, and that stays with voters, and a lot of people are probably going to be lazy. And they remember Kenneth Grant, not for all the great contributions he made playing his role in the defense, but making that one play against Penn State. So yes, that would be the third of the 4. And then the least likely to happen for me is Donovan Edwards winning the Doak Walker Award. I think there's a lot of competition at running back. It's almost entirely about statistics.
Yep.
The voters will just look at statistics and line them up and say, well, this dude scored 20 touchdowns and ran for 1,500 yards. You've got the rushing champion back from last year and Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State. So I would say that is the least likely of happening.
I don't think your analysis is terrible at all, but I am operating under the premise for twofold. Number one, all of these guys have huge preseason hype to varying degrees. All of them do. So they're already in the consciousness of voters for these awards. Number two, at the end of the year, when more people are watching the sport than at any other time, they're going to play Ohio State and Oregon. Those are going to be the 2 biggest platforms anybody is going to have in the sport in the month of November, which is the pinnacle sport. It could also be argued the game against Michigan and Texas will be the biggest platform in the entire sport any game will have. Until, except for Alabama and Georgia, maybe, until Michigan and Ohio State play at the end of the year. And given again the size of those universities, their fan bases, their alumni bases. So these are major places for these guys to shine and to take their games to the next level. And my value bet all preseason, and you saw this in my preview, is Donovan Edwards. I think he's going to have a monster season. I do. I think there'll be more of a running element at quarterback that you'll have to respect on a down-to-down basis. And I think that they're going to use him, in an Alvin Kamara way. I think you're going to see him get 15 to 18 carries a game, 8 to 10 catches a game. And he's on the cover of the video game, everything else. I think he's going to take a step forward and have a monster year.
All right. Well, Steve, as we continue on, it's good to know that you bring me on here for not terrible analysis. That's good to know.
That's a compliment from a Michigan fan, brother. Take it. Take yes for an answer, Mark. Yes.
Running down the rest of this. So I didn't have anything too significant here. You and I both think that Jayshon Barham will just have an outstanding season, even though the linebackers at Michigan, Junior Colson, Michael Barrett, outstanding guys that will be revered.
See, Mark, you think I went overboard. I've restrained myself. Could you imagine that guy's going to, if he stays healthy, he's going to play at least 12 games behind Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Wink Martindale's defense, dude? Yeah. I mean, if that's 120 tackles, 10 sacks, he's going to be the linebacker with the least amount of grass stains on his jersey in all of college football, Mark. I mean, the numbers he could pile up are freaking ridiculous. So if you think I went overboard, I held back. I left him off, man.
No, you just went out of order is what you did. Take out Edwards and throw in Barham.
Throw him in instead. Okay, I'd make that. I can get that trade. I get you. Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, exactly, because he's a better athlete than the two guys that he's basically replacing as star linebackers there at Michigan. So good selection there. Tyler Morris. What I remember about Tyler Morris is us having a discussion, and I forget how you posed the question, but this was between Big Ten championship game and Rose Bowl. And I made the comment that there is usually a guy or two per team that breaks out because
like an outlier, like John Beilein used to say. Yeah.
At some point, and they got behind in the depth chart, but they've got some time to get healthy, and then show it when the coaches get refocused on our personnel versus the game preparation. And he was the guy that obviously stood out in the Rose Bowl with the one huge play. And I got to think that he's going to be catching those type of passes with Alex Orji. It's not going to be the deep downfield shots, the difficult NFL throws on the out routes. It's going to be, let's get him a little crossing route and just hit him and let him burn the defense and turn the corner. So, he's impressive. That's a good selection right there as well. So Jordan Marshall, in regards to him showing up and being this kind of a factor, I'm not denying the talent here, but I'm just, with that depth at running back and with the Doak Walker Award winner in the backfield, I'm just questioning his opportunities.
I hear you, and I frankly could not come up with another true freshman on offense, which is weird because that's the side of the ball that has all the questions, but it's also the side of the ball where the further away from the ball, the old saying goes, the more likely you're ready to play early on, right? And so we actually have a lot of depth at offensive line. I mean, we have a lot of guys that we have been, mentoring and programming and everything else for the last 3 years. So a freshman's not going to play there. And you're not going to play one at quarterback, obviously, unless they're a superstar recruit. And Jaden Davis is a good recruit, but he's not that level of recruit. I mean, a guy like Julian Sand, he couldn't even win the Ohio State quarterback job as a freshman over, the K-State transfer. It's hard to do that, even if you are a superstar recruit. So wide receiver, we haven't recruited there, frankly, well in the last class, so there was nobody there. So it was kind of Jordan Marshall really by default. There just wasn't, I can't come up with another true freshman that I would tell you right now I think for sure will be a significant statistical factor on the team, on the offensive side.
And if they run through their Big Ten schedule like they have in the last 3 seasons, and there's a lot of 45 threes in the third quarter, fourth quarter, then maybe he'll get his shot. But I know that depth chart is pretty sick there at a running back. It's really stacked.
Okay. So right now, because the next time we talk will be in game week, and it'll be time to look ahead and talk actual ball. So this is the last opportunity. We spend 9 months doing this in college football, projecting things out, discussing things, everything else, So Well, let me start here. How much of the Big Ten networks, can't preview stuff do you watch?
I usually watch 100% of it. I've watched 0% of it as we sit right now.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I've not been watching it, but typically I watch all of it.
So I've watched 50% of it. I'm watching them 9 at a time. So I've watched the first 9, and Ohio State and Oregon were in there, and it was fascinating to see they had the same crews, because with the league so big now, different crews are doing a lot of different teams, but they had the same full crew do both Oregon and Ohio State. So it was interesting to get their comparisons. You'll get a kick out of this. Jerry DiNardo said about Penn State, quote, "just looks like every other Penn State team we've ever seen," end quote. All right. So, what's funny is the years go on, Jerry now has decided, and Jim Delaney's gone, that he can actually give opinions now. So he's telling people what he really thinks. I mean, Howard is still out there. Everybody's great. The guy, and you can tell when a team's going to suck, because Howard will always say, "Well, I didn't see anybody falling down out there." Like, that should be a thing. Like, this is major college football. People are just falling down on drills. That's where we are. Okay. But, it was clear from the first 9 teams that they thought Ohio State and Oregon were just at a completely different level of everybody else. It was also clear that Jerry was concerned. I mean, Jerry said the offensive line development, quote, "is still a ways away," end quote. Okay. Now, he's talking about winning a natty. He's not like talking about going 8-4. Okay. He's talking about winning a natty. So it's predisposed to people's expectations. So with that being said, and it could be Michigan related, it doesn't have to be though. As given, because you've got your correspondence and you're doing shows with, team reporters across the league, what sticks out to you the most in terms of changing what were your pre-fall camp perceptions of a player and or a team? It can even be a couple of them, but, now that we're towards the end of camp and almost a game week, what are you rethinking maybe?
Well, I have more concerns about Ohio State than the guys that join me on my weekly Ohio State show that cover this team every day. They are pretty high on this team, which of course everyone is to a large extent, but we're talking about, do they go 11-1 and maybe win the Big Ten or lose the title game and get deep in the playoffs, or do they go on and win a national championship? We're talking about an extremely high standard. And again, Will Howard, he had games at Kansas State that, boy, he could just not show up and play like this in a Big Ten game against Oregon, Michigan, and a few other teams, in fact. And I don't want to make perfection the standard for these guys, but we're talking about a position that's had the likes of Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud, and those guys that weren't good enough to get the job done. And now we're talking about the 20th best quarterback in the country. And like many positions, especially that one, the fall off after the first 3 or 4 is pretty significant usually. So he's a nice player. And again, when he was quarterback in Kansas State, and I had no idea he was ever headed to Columbus, I used to sit there and watch him. And I remember the first time he ever hit the field, I thought, this guy's a really good quarterback for Kansas State. But for Ohio State, I just don't. I know that I'm hearing they're going to, be run heavy, but they have too much talent on the outside with these wide receivers just to let them just catch little curl routes all season.
Yeah.
He didn't show any ability to throw the ball deep with any kind of authority or accuracy consistently. In regards to comparing him to his predecessors. So that's a difficult call for me to make, that he's going to be able to come through, because their team is going to have to be the best team in the country, not where Will Howard makes them the best team in the country or keeps them the best team in the country. Like, they're going to have to elevate him, and they're going to have to significantly be the best team in the country for them to win a national championship.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I told you a couple weeks ago, I am really curious to see with the Emeka Ibukas and, Carnell Tates and Jeremiah Smiths. I mean, these are guys that Ibuka could be in the pros right now. Smith and Tate could have picked any school in the country they wanted to go to. And, they did not think they were getting the Chip Kelly downhill running game with 2 NFL tailbacks and a Jag plus mobile quarterback system when they signed on here. That's not what they thought they were getting. And I will be fascinated to see when you guys are just piling up huge numbers because your schedule is so much like ours was a year ago, at least to start out anyway. And these guys aren't playing a lot because you don't want to risk them getting injured against, Nebraska or something when you're probably up by 3 touchdowns. I'll be curious to see how that's handled. That's just an entirely different environment, and it could be great that, guys came back, for unfinished business. But on our side, guys like Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson were solid 4-star, receiver prospects, but it wasn't like it was down to Michigan and Alabama and Georgia, okay, for those guys. It wasn't. It was like something would have to go really right for those guys to be out of college after year 3. Okay, so they kind of knew what they were getting into in terms of the system. I don't know. That'll be an interesting transition, and it'll be I remember when you all lost to Sparty in that rainstorm in 2015, and somehow Urban Meyer finally found a game he didn't want to power run the quarterback 70 times, right? And you lost. And Ezekiel Elliott lost his mind afterwards, all right? And we had to bear the brunt of that the very next week, okay? But let's say you go to Oregon and lose that game, and the power running thing, and Oregon gangs up on it, and it's just not there, right? Those receivers are going to stay quiet. I don't know. That's a new dynamic, and I could be a Michigan fan, just looking for tweaks here and there, but it is something that has not had to been confronted or dealt with in your program before. And I will be, at least in this iteration of it under Ryan Day, I should say. So I will be fascinated to see how that plays itself out when these guys aren't catching 7, 8, 9, 10 balls, or not even getting maybe 7 or 8, 9, 10 targets many of these weeks, let alone catches. I will be fascinated to see how that plays itself out. I don't know. Might be fine. We'll see.
And the other psychological angle to it is, of course, the pressure. And I know that it's Ohio State, and they all talked a good game at the Big Ten Media Days. And I make the same comment. It's Ohio State. They're supposed to win a national championship every year. That's supposed to be the goal. That's supposed to be the expectation. And the goals don't change from year to year. And shoot, they've been living in the top 5 for 20 years. So why would this season be any different? But it just is. There is a championship or bust, even though I hate that moniker. There is a championship or bust thought process to it. And we talked a few weeks ago, Steve, about the way Michigan responded to a different kind of pressure from a different source last year, and they thrived on it. It fueled them. Well, is this team going to wilt under that pressure, those expectations? Or are they going to take it? They're talking a good game, and maybe they're trying to convince themselves, or maybe that's a true reflection of where they're at. And we both know, as you mentioned, going out to Eugene and some other stops along the way, they will get punched in the mouth, and there will be adversity. They're not beating everyone 45-7 on the way to a national championship. So are they up to it?
Great stuff as always, Mark. Next time we talk, it'll be a full-fledged game week. Looking forward to it, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve.
You bet. All right, this week's Twitter poll or X poll results. Do you think Michigan gets into the college football playoff at 9-3? 58% of you said no. 42% of you said yes. I think it's closer to 50-50 if one of those wins is against one of those big 3 teams. If it's 9-3, but the 3 losses are those big teams, then I'd probably go closer to these odds and be 60-40 against. But if it's 9-3, but one of those wins is against Texas, Oregon, or Ohio State, I think it's closer to 50-50. That brings us to our feedback of the week from Jeffrey the Greek, who says no, assuming the 3 losses are against Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. Who would be their big wins? Also, many of these college football fans predicting their 10-2 team is a lock to get in are going to be upset. I kind of agree with this. I think strength of schedule is going to matter more than record going forward. And you got to think more in line of college basketball now. I mean, if you look at 2 teams in particular that I had a real hard time ranking in my preview, Notre Dame and Ole Miss. I think they're both very good, but their schedules are kind of a couple of games, and then the rest of them, they're massive favorites. So if Notre Dame, loses at Texas A&M, and then drops another game somewhere along the line, Clemson, Florida State, USC, 10-2 is a great year, but where are their quality wins to justify putting them in the playoff at that record? And I would say the same thing with Ole Miss. I mean, if they don't beat Georgia, and they don't beat LSU, their best win is Florida, who has a win total of 5 right now. And so I agree. For some of these big name teams, Jeffrey, 10-2 is not all 10-2s are going to be the same. I agree with you on that. So good analysis. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Next time we see you on MP, it's game week. All right. So we're looking forward to that. In the meantime, like, rate, share, subscribe, 5-star review, whether you're watching here on YouTube, listening on iTunes or elsewhere. Help us to find more Michigan fans just like you. We really appreciate when you do that. Thank you to all of you who have. You can follow us in between episodes as well at Michigan Podcast on X. Until the next time, I'm Steve Day saying, go Blue.